Greetings all. Welcome back to another episode of the Coptimizer Podcast. This week we have our fabulous guest, Timo Sandritter. And Timo's, I'm going to let him tell his story here in a minute, but we had an amazing pre-call last week and I wish I would have just recorded it. It's not the first time we got into some really cool conversations about health and wellness and performance, and I think you're really going to enjoy today's conversation as we get into performance improvement, performance enhancement, and who better to get this information from than a former professional football player. That's football with a U. Well, I guess maybe in some countries, but we're talking European football, not American football. Welcome, sir.
Thank you. Thanks for having me. I'm excited.
Yeah, it's great. It's great to have you. Can you just tell us a little bit about yourself? And we don't have to get into the immigration story, but we can if you want.
Yeah, I mean, there's not much to it. I came to the US at a fairly young age, in the early 90s, well, mid 90s. Played a little bit of soccer here and there, or football. Like you said, played a little bit of soccer here and there. But was blessed to play at a decent level that enabled me to, pay some bills, get some scholarships. Tuition at the university in the United States is expensive. And so it definitely enabled me to get a lot of education for a decent amount of money instead of just paying a lot of money. I got injured, unfortunately, and it was never my career. I was good, but not great, and definitely not good enough to play for a long time at the highest level where it's financially lucrative. But I always liked sports. I've been playing sports for a long time, not just soccer, a little bit of martial arts, a little bit of running, snow skiing, and so forth. And so I've always combined my intellectual life, my professional life, with my personal life in the context of, in a healthy body is a healthy mind.
Amen. Healthy body, healthy mind. So speaking of your intellectual pursuits, so where did you study and what did you study?
I went to a few different institutions, in Germany and of course the US as well. And so when I first came to the US, I played soccer and I really just wanted to play soccer, and the degree itself was secondary. It was industrial engineering economics. But then I went off and did what most people do. They get, a master's in business for the most part, and I did that. And then I really enjoyed playing soccer and also being in school, because it was a lot of free time on both sides versus, working 40, 50 hours. And so long story short, I ended up going to law school simply because it made sense, and I like to argue, but it made sense. And so I did the whole law school thing. I knew I didn't want to be a solo practitioner. I did the MBA thing because I knew I wanted to go in-house and be in a business setting, and I really enjoyed that. But everything around that was always people-centric. I ended up going and get my first PhD in business right after getting that master's in business. But it was focused on anything related to post-merger and acquisition integrations, and it was focused on the people side. And the reason why I bring that up is because I've always been very people-centric in my professional pursuit. So I did employment and labor law. I did then, again, almost like the human resource side on the business side, and all of that stuff. And it was a really, really interest of me. I ended up going to a few institutions here in the US, including Harvard and Cornell and the University of Southern California and Columbia University, all for graduate school, all for various degrees. And the latest degree was probably my doctorates from the University of Southern California, which is a second doctorate in organizational change and leadership. The reason why I bring all of that up is when you look me up, you think, wow, that guy went to a lot of schools for a lot of degrees. Does he not know what he wants to do? But it's more a matter of, no, it's that I really like learning, and I really like the cognitive side of people behavior, right? And really understanding people. I don't believe one size fits it all, right? Not in sports and not in professional settings. And from that perspective, my education is really tailored towards, let's call it human performance. And it was a very long-winded answer just to tell you
Oh
where I
no.
went to
Well,
school.
no, yeah, it was, I think it's really pertinent to what we want to talk about today. Because it just shows that you're just not a very driven person, right? Oh my gosh. Yeah. Yeah, that's an amazing background. My favorite part about that is just the concept and the idea of being a lifelong learner. Um, I think it's so important, particularly for cops. I mean, for everybody, but really our audience is primarily public safety and law enforcement. And we're having this big discussion around the country, really for the last 5 years, um, about how do we develop and continue the professional development of the profession overall. Um, and there's been a lot of high profile incidents that have brought up officer performance. And I think as a country, we've kind of taken a step backwards in terms of how we solve the problem, through things like depolicing, or, a defund the police movement, because I've always it just never made any sense to me, right? And I know I've ranted about this many times, but if you want to improve the performance of something, then you have to invest in it, and you have to double down on your investment. So just this whole idea that you're going to defund the police, but then expect your results to get better, just never made any sense. And from a human performance perspective, yeah, I mean, it just, maybe you want to chime in on that, but from someone that has such a high level of professional experience and knowledge outside of policing, does that concept, does it make any sense to you?
Well, I mean, to me, life is about lifelong learning, but it's also about, not necessarily separating my professional life and my personal life, because I have one life, right? And
Right.
so whatever we do, whatever we encounter, it's about, progression and moving forward. I subscribe to the philosophy that once you stand still, you regress, right? And that's when it gets worse, whether it's in sports, whether it's with our cognitive abilities, whether it's with our general well-being, spiritually included. And so it's more about, hey, doing something indefinitely versus, just doing it one time and then hoping to reap the fruits of our labor for the next, I don't know how many years, right? And so I'm a big advocate of ongoing items of coaching and feedback culture that's embedded deep in us and not just, delegated to us. I'm a big advocate of supporting one another on a physical and cognitive level to provide some emotional well-being. But obviously I have a bias, otherwise I wouldn't do what I do.
All right. Yeah, we all have it. And you have a bias towards action, if nothing else, and learning, which I think it's fantastic. So, there's a ton that we could talk about today, but I really kind of wanted to focus a lot of our conversation on what you're doing now with Rippleworx and with Magnusworx. So could you give us a little bit of background on your work with Dr. Mitch Davidi? I think it's Dr. Paul Zach, and really anything else, uh, you know, anyone else that you're working with, just kind of and we can build up to the app and what you're doing, but I'm just really excited about the work that you're doing.
Yeah, so I call myself an HR professional, right? Human resource. I've been in the HR profession for 20, 25 years, always dealt with people. Dr. Javidi and his National Command and Staff College, they've been in law enforcement for a very long time. I served in the Army over 20 years ago, but that's the last encounter that I had in an environment that's similar. Definitely not the same, but similar to law enforcement. So I would never step out and claim to know the world of a police officer. But what we do as Rippleworx, we've always been a performance accelerator, and we have been an HR solution, technology solution. And so we built Rippleworx based on the ripple or the compound effect to understand that as individuals, you can do a diet, you cannot eat for 3 days, and I'm sure you lose weight, but is it really sustainable? And so we subscribe to this compound effect of ongoing coaching and feedback, ongoing training and development, ongoing understanding of what it takes to have a well system that is cognitive and emotional, and that entire well-being, where it's set up to make sense on an ongoing basis, not just temporarily, right? I mean, we know that we can go on vacation for a few days and we get some R&R in after like day 4, and then we go back into a high stress environment, and that's fine, right? But even in those high stress environments, we don't want to burn out, and we don't want to, push people to have a heart attack, for example, at the worst case example. And so from that HR perspective, what we do, understanding people behavior, and then of course that marriage that formed Magnusworx with Dr. Javidi, who has been in the law enforcement world for many, many years, right? He's a professor. He was a professor at the university for many years, but he also developed some concept on leadership and leadership development and training that we strongly believe in, from Rippleworx perspective. And so we started forming this let's call it joint venture, for the lack of better words, where we said, okay, we want to help. We really want to help law enforcement, police, Department of Correction, sheriffs, to be in sync with everything they do. From my perspective, and I found a very, very different appreciation over the last few years working with police departments. I didn't know what it all relates. I figured, well, they, put the bad guys away and that's about it. But then, but realistically, I didn't know any police officers, right? I didn't have anything to do with police officers. My world was all in the business world, and I never really got in trouble. Well, maybe when I first came to the US, not knowing that you do have a speed limit on the Autobahn, on the interstate. But all joking aside, but I didn't have any interactions with individuals. And
that's most people, though. Most people don't.
There was definitely a level of respect, and in Germany there's a different level of respect that the police officers receive, and in the US there was definitely a level of respect that I had, but I also saw a lot of negative stuff that those poor officers, and I'm talking about the ones that are like out there running the streets, helping us, protecting my property, protecting my life, putting their own in danger. And those are incredible individuals, but the stress they have to deal with, not only worrying about the bad guy, but also about the public and the social media these days. And I like I said, I formed a different appreciation for those individuals that are out there protecting us, that I said, we want to serve them. We want to create impact in their lives. And it's not just a matter of, oh, look, we give them some kind of resource that they can take advantage of. But no, we want to make sure that we have measurable results that is positive by equipping them with what they need to do their job best. And that's what that formation of Magnusworx was, that marriage of anything related to training development, mainly on the resiliency side even, right? To understand, to be in sync, to have that well-being, but measurable, right, over time. Of course, we can all go to classrooms and we can all, get learning that way, but it doesn't take much time to spend with me to know that I have ADHD and OCD and a whole bunch of other things where if you put me in a classroom, despite all my education, it's really hard for me to stay focused. And so understanding people where they are in their learning experience, understanding where their motivation fits, understanding how they want to receive the information they learn, and then making sure what they learn is also tested, that it sticks in their hippocampus. That's what we do with software. So think of all the content that Dr. Javidi had and all of the learning management tools together with what we do at Rippleworx as an HR tech platform. That is that marriage that serves that industry.
So let's back up for just a second. So some of the early work that you guys were doing was with Air Force Special Operations. Were you doing that before you went into the law enforcement and public safety space? And then I assume from that work, you kind of started to see where this would apply because of some of the stressors being similar.
Yeah, and we originally started with professional athletes.
Okay.
So we wanted to measure, as Rippleworx that is. So we wanted to see how we can correlate different data sets that you receive from like hardware, right? Some people, and I don't want to do marketing for any of the brands out there, but there's various devices that you can use when you run.
Right.
That there's various devices you can use to track your sleep and so forth, right? And so all of those different hardware devices, we used the data from there and correlated it to understand performance in the terms of acceleration, but also items like recuperation, regeneration, making sure that you're not susceptible towards injury in high performing and stress environments. And so that's where we originally started in 2018. Of course, most of us in Rippleworx that came from the HR tech world, we knew we were going to go back to the HR world. So anything that was physical before on the athletic side or the professional sports team side now was focused on the cognitive side of individuals within working environments, but again, HR employee driven cognitive behavior. Well, we have a very strong advisory team and contributors to our Rippleworx team, and many of them have served in the military. And there was a play in the Air Force with the Human Performance Wing, where we said, okay, we can look at the fighter pilots, for example,
Okay.
and their readiness levels, and how we can help them be ready for whatever action it may take, right? And so under a certain grader, under the Human Performance Wing, we built those capacities. Well, when you're in the military, it is not hard to deviate to law enforcement. Or at least there's a natural progression to also look at law enforcement. And
Right.
so we started looking at law enforcement and how we can see parallels there and what we can do to help the individuals that don't necessarily deploy, but where the danger zones are right in front of their house, right? I mean, where they don't go far away to go into the bad areas, but rather, in this area, and what it means for them and their stress levels, especially, right? I mean, the stress levels obviously go up when action hits. And how do you calm down again? How do you recuperate? How do you ensure that you counter those stress levels before it's too late, right? Before you burn out.
Yeah, this is really fascinating because, and I'll just give an example. So when I was in the Air Force, I'm an Air Force veteran, long time ago. My last duty station was in Alaska, up in the middle of nowhere. Most people probably a little fighter interceptor base called Galena, and this was at the end of the Cold War. So the only job there really was we had about 300 personnel there to support a few F-15s that were on 24-hour standby. The pilots would come up for 2 weeks at a time. We were up by the Arctic Circle, up on the banks of the Yukon River, up in the middle of nowhere. And when the pilots were there, they were there on 24-hour standby. And their only job was to be there if we got an alert that there were Russian aircraft that were coming into international airspace up in the Arctic. They would scramble the jets. They would go up and meet them. And, it was just kind of the whole, and back then, right, they would just kind of, pilots would wave to each other and then, the great game continued. But, that's the concept, right, of you're just kind of sitting around waiting to go. And when, I was in, the security police then, and then after college, you started working in municipal law enforcement, and you realize real quick, like there's a lot of similarities in there in that most people assume that the police are doing a lot of things that they're really not, or at least in terms of how much their time is, how their time is dispersed throughout a typical shift, where you could have like long uninterrupted periods where you're just sitting in a car, where you're driving on free patrol, where if you don't have something going on, and then you get a hot call, maybe like a crime in progress, like a shooting or a battery or a robbery or something like that, and you've got to respond, get there quickly. And so your emotional regulation, you're going from 0 to 100 and then back down once that's done. And you might do that 5, 6 times in a night. And depending on where you work, really, and the activity level of your department, really, I mean, it could be a lot more frequent that on a standard shift, or it could be seldom. And so some officers might have very, very long periods of sedentary time where they're not moving, they're not doing a whole lot, they're not really stressed, and then you have those peaks. But you're doing things like working shift work and odd hours. So you have all these different types of stressors, right? The physical, the chemical, the emotional, and they all impact people differently. So it was, I actually just wrote, one of my articles that I was finishing up and pushing out just before we jumped on this call was kind of a story about this and how I stumbled into the impact of nutrition on my performance, and how different diets can impact performance, and how they can impact how you feel, how you sleep, all of these things. And so for me, really early on in my career, I was just kind of lucky that I stumbled into some of these things that sent me down a path. So that's kind of where I share your passion for lifelong learning. And I know I've driven a lot of people crazy over the years, talking about some of this stuff, like, God, does he ever shut up? But I can't help it. So that's when I get someone like you on the line, and get to ask questions and really kind of pick your brain. It really, I get excited about it. So I do, again, appreciate your time. But with all that being said, the military has a lot. In some aspects, they have a lot more control over their time, because when you deploy, you deploy. And you're separate for the most part, right? You're separate from your home environment, and you have these times to train where you don't have to worry about deploying in a live environment. You can practice until you get things right. And then hopefully, if the time comes, you can go, do your job, whatever that might be, and then have the opportunity to kind of reflect, learn from how things went, and move on. Whereas in policing, it's a fast spin up cycle. We train people to kind of a base level of competency, not an advanced level, but a base level, and then we put them out into the work environment, and then we expect them to kind of learn and build from there. And one of the things that we have always fallen short of is training the individual how to optimize themselves, how to best prepare themselves to be able to maximize their opportunities to learn, to engage in physical activities, to recover. So, that's why I have a tremendous amount of interest in what you guys are doing. And that was a long way of saying, walk me through, like, what it would look like for someone. Let's just say I want to engage with Magnusworx. What would an onboarding look like? And then what would you do to kind of, number one, educate people on what the program is and what it can do for you, but how you would engage with it?
Hey, give me 1 second. Can we put a pause? Sorry.
Absolutely. 1 second.
Hey, I'm
All right. Yeah, now we're back. So that was a great example, right, of going from 0 to 100. You never know when crisis might
actually,
occur.
well, in sports, most of the time you have time to warm up a little bit, right, before you go into the action. But yeah, not in real life and in other situations. I think we have a saying, training makes a master, right? And so there is a lot about repetition to be prepared when it matters, right? There's reflex and natural reflex that you can over time train on, and where you react faster, and you have that natural reaction towards a certain situation. But there's also preparation that understands all of that. And so from our philosophy, what we subscribe to, and I mentioned it earlier, that Rippleworx is built on the ripple or compound effect. So small things over an ongoing or long period of time create a big value. And from our perspective, we also look at the individual first. So we look at the skills the individual possesses on the hard skill side and the soft skill side. Hard skills in law enforcement could be anything like detective work, or when you're in traffic violations, or you're on the SWAT team, any of that knowledge that you gain, that cognitive knowledge that you gain because you're educated, because you're trained, because you're prepared. And then of course the soft skill side, items like communication, and then of course emotional intelligence, those leadership skills that you can also train, but they are different to measure. Well, what's different about our offering is we also look at motivation. So it's not just a matter of saying, well, Timo is decent at something, but he has to learn more. Therefore, I just provide him with more and more training, right? Well, that may work, but if you don't give me the training the way I can receive the training, you're throwing pearls in front of the pigs. In my case, literally. And so, no, all joking aside, but it's understanding motivational drivers, and those motivational drivers are not items, like money or even status or prestige. They're more like self-efficacy and attribution. There's those cognitive drivers that are hoping to jump on our intrinsic motivation, like things that get me excited, right? In my case, it is attribution, right? I like to be part of the team. I like to be part of that, that athlete from back in the day in me. And so how can you set up that environments for learning? And so you look at the skill, you look at the motivation, and then we add that organizational context that, what is the need of the organization? Is it really just to provide training, anything like statutory compliance where you just have to push training through so to receive it? Or is it an upskilling or cross-skilling in a different vertical that they want to have? There's people that want to learn a different language, despite that it may not have anything to do with their job, but it could help them do their job better, but it's not directly related. And so it's through those micro learnings that we push it through our system where the people receive the training the way they need to receive it. And then we make sure that we also look at if the training was effective. So, we can all study to take a test, right? We put it in our frontal cortex, short-term memory, we take the test. Hopefully we get a good grade and we forget about it, right? I've done many seminars where I went to a seminar, I signed in, I played golf. I mean, I sat in the classroom all day, I paid attention, I learned everything now. But I gotta be careful.
None of that in law enforcement. Nobody ever does that.
But we go and we go to a seminar and a lot of stuff do stick. And even when we participate and we're excited, we come home and it's kumbaya, but the next day we're like, I don't know. And over time it wears off. And it's important that we, especially some of the training we do is important, right? To make sure it sticks longer. It's not just in the frontal cortex or the short-term memory, but embedded in the hippocampus. And so our system then has those, what we call action and triggers, that we provide through those micro learnings where, you take the training, you measure the result. And so it's a philosophy of we analyze status quo, right? We understand what does it look like. We pulse the organization through like surveys on different mechanisms to get a status quo. Then we will look what it takes. We develop, then we measure, and then we perform, and then everything starts over again. And it's on an ongoing base. And so I know that sounds very academic, and our chief marketing officer and our strategy officer and our salespeople would probably grind their teeth hearing me talk about it because I can't become philosophical in that area, but because it's also a passion project, right?
No, I love it. I love it.
Individual. Now, what's also important is that, the individual don't pay the bill, right? It's of course the department, the chiefs, the city, the, commissioners, the sheriff. And so it's putting it in an organizational context. And what I mean by that is, I give you a stupid example, right? But if I say, hey, I'm really excited about learning German. Okay. So I have the motivation, let's say, and I'm decent at it, but there's a gap and I learn it. Well, if my company doesn't need me to learn German, it's either an added benefit to me, which is fine, or it's a waste of money and has zero impact on my performance on the job, right?
Right.
And so it's really, really important that we measure results, that the impact we create in individuals then create impact on the organization. And without sounding too economically driven, but we look at items like a decrease in attrition. Right? There's high levels of attrition, there's burnout, there's, it's very expensive to get a police officer or a sheriff or a law enforcement officer from off the street through the academy on the job, right? It takes a long time, it takes money, it takes resources. And so we want to make sure that we set an environment for the individual where he or she doesn't leave afterwards, right? So we want to focus on a decrease in attrition for the department or the unit and so forth. Another measurable is, of course, an increase in productivity, an increase in employee satisfaction or job satisfaction. There's something called the employee net promoter score that we measure, right? And so we want to make sure people are happy without going too far.
Yeah, before we go too far down that path, I want to go back because that touches on something that's probably near and dear to every chief's heart right now, and really any recruiter in the country is we have the demand for services is not changing, right? If anything, it's going up, but we have less personnel available because of high rates of attrition and turnover for a lot of different reasons. So now you have more people calling and demanding services with less people to meet that demand. So that goes back to what you were saying earlier about the pressure and now the risk of burnout on an individual. So you mentioned this earlier, so I wanted to kind of point this out too. One of the solutions that we see across the country is everybody assumes this is a money problem, that it's a salary and a benefit issue, that all we need to do is increase our salary and we'll then increase the number of recruits that are coming to the profession. But we found, well, that's wrong. That's fourth, fifth, sixth on the list. That's not what's driving people to come in. What's driving people into this profession is the same thing that's always driven them into it. It's a passion to serve. It's, this, and this innate, I think, human need to help others, or the desire to want to help others and be a part of a team like you're talking about. And, so it is kind of a unique profession, but everybody is different. Everybody learns at different paces. And I want to kind of touch on a few things here, because been this long argument. I mean, ever since I came into the profession in the mid 90s, right? I was in the military in the late 80s. I went to college, and then I worked for a while, and then I came into the profession. And there was this argument back then, well, who makes the best cop? Is it a military veteran? Is it a college graduate? There was a push even back then for this increased level of professionalism, higher levels of education. So we should have college graduates. So agencies started adding these academic requirements for hiring. And then I think we found out that, well, that's not necessarily moving the needle, maybe in certain cases. So and then, well, if we hire this person that's academically oriented, but then we need the street smarts, because they don't understand life on the street, or they're easily manipulated, or they don't have the physical skills or the aggression that sometimes is needed in that environment. So there is a challenge there about how you train and prepare new officers when their needs are all different. I mean, you could hire 100 people, and the job every day, I could do 100 different things in one day. So how do I prepare people to be as good as they can be, to meet a minimum level of expectation, at least in all of those things? Because if you can't meet a minimum level, then you're going to fail in some aspect. Yeah. So the method, so I'm really curious about this, and you guys, and like the way that you're harnessing the technology to help people learn new skills. And then the last thing I'll say is, and I'll give an example of what I mean by this, like, and maybe where knowledge transfer occurs. Like I've been in the CrossFit space for a long time. One of the things, when I went through the CrossFit Level 1 certification, it's a weekend seminar, and you go through it. It's a great crawl, walk, run process where you learn, the mechanics of movement. You understand the fundamentals about why you're doing what you're doing. You have some time where you get someone showing you how to do it, and then you practice it on your own, and then you teach somebody else how to do it. But at the end of those 2 days, it was one of the best trainings I'd ever been to. And even though it didn't necessarily have anything to do with my job as a police officer, well, outside of the fitness aspect of it, right? Being functionally fit and prepared to be able to do my job, that skill transferred. But I was really more fascinated with the way that they structured the class. And I was thinking, man, this would be such a better way to teach police officers, whether it's physical tactics, whether it's even, law and policy, different things that we have to do. So can you touch on that for a few minutes about why you think that's, what maybe the little bit of the science behind that, and then how, I don't know, maybe I'm not asking this question well, but
No,
do
no,
you know
no.
what I'm getting at?
Well, my ADHD kicks in, and so I need to be careful that I don't go into too many of the different areas. And so, before I go into the science, I personally believe in cross training, meaning I really do believe that, if you're an accountant, you can still try to learn an art, right? I know that
Right.
sounds mainstream, but everybody should have some level of appreciation for some kind of music or the arts, just because left brain, right brain, right? Philosophy. I also believe that there's no negative performers. Everybody's good at something, right? And you probably know Einstein saying that, if you judge a goldfish by its ability to climb a tree, it will always think it's stupid, right? And it's a matter of the goldfish not being in its element, right? But because
Right.
that's the element. I mean, if you give me a football and tell me, sorry. Perfect. So, looking at of course, getting the right person on the bus. Everybody knows that analogy. Getting him the right seat of the bus, also important. But then what other role does the person play on that bus, right? I probably hand out snacks, somebody drives the bus, other people maybe cleaning the windows. It's a stupid analogy, but it makes sense, right? It's about being in your element. And so if you don't believe in negative performance, now, of course, there's this level of, let's call it parasite or people that take advantage of a system. Of course, you always get that. But if people are happy in what they're doing, they're in their element, they feel comfortable, they feel encouraged, then A, they automatically get better. B, they're less likely to leave the organization, and C, they're in sync and they can do it indefinitely, right? I mean, within reason. And
Yeah.
so that whole saying with the whole goldfish thing, I subscribe to. I want to make sure that people are really in their right element of what they're doing. But what that means is it's more than just the tactical components of their job. And so when I talked earlier, we have quite a few athletes that are part of our company. And to be an athlete, you don't have to be in a professional level, right? Everybody can be an athlete. If you go and take a walk every day, you can be an athlete. But
Right.
but
I like people. I like it when people do consider themselves athletes. I think it changes the way that you approach what you're doing.
absolutely. And so in our case, right, as a company, we look at athletes that are in particular roles that are team players, of course, right? And so, football, soccer, basketball, those are all team sports. And that, in my opinion, says something about the person, right? Because if you pick a team sport and you like that collaboration, and then of course you have the, tennis players or bodybuilders that are more on the individual level, but that also has maybe that drive of like, hey, I'm gonna be the greatest salesperson and so forth. And so I think we can learn a lot in terms of sport. And I guess you can even include the video gaming industry as a sport, and chess as a mental sport, right? And there's a
Right.
lot of stuff around being an athlete. But my point in all of that is to look at it not just in the individual in that particular role, because you were talking about getting individuals trained in a Pacific, but I know in police force there's people that may be over the academy and then they rotate and become in charge of SWAT. Very different job in my opinion, right? It's like almost me like from an accountant to an HR person, I guess, which hopefully never happens. But it's a little bit of that job rotation, and
Yeah.
we know job rotation is a great motivator, right? Because it takes you out of your normal thing today and puts you in a different thing, so that you automatically have to learn more. The point of that is, Dr. Javidi developed what he calls the 11 rings. And those 11 rings touch a variety of different areas. Even what we call financial freedom. Things that have nothing to do with the individual's job itself, but taking some burden away. When you are prepared, that means you're ready to deploy. You're ready to do something. It's no different in sports. It's no different in our normal life, right? When you know about a subject, when you are prepared to tackle that subject, when it relates to money, when it relates to religion, spirituality, any topic, the more you know about it, the least it scares you, right? And the more you are able to tackle. I don't know many people who have really prepared for something and then said, you know what, I just don't want to do it, unless the preparation itself was the journey, right?
Right.
And so in that same environment, we really try to get the people through software, through understanding. Software cuts out the human error, right? And so the reason why software is very powerful in this, because we pulse the organization. When you have a complex organization that is potentially distributed workforce, different location, different precincts, different shifts, right? Different roles, different jobs, different tenures, different hierarchical levels. It's very hard for the chief to know what the middle managers, the officers do, or even the commanders or the sergeants. I mean, to have, if you have a large police force, but to get in sync, it's much easier to measure that with software, right? I use a stupid analogy again, but if I ask somebody, how you doing? And they tell me 99 times they're good, and they tell me 1 time that they're great. I may not know that outlier, but the system sees an outlier, right? Good, great. So, but why was he great that day? That kind of stuff. Understanding all of that, having software do that for you is a lot easier than an individual constantly trying to monitor everybody's well-being to be in sync, and then everybody's need for development in a particular setting. And so the reason why I believe our solution itself can be not just a really good benefit for organizations such as high-performing teams and police forces, but also anybody for that matter, is because we really measure results, right? We really want to create impact in the individual and the organization, and not just like, hey, use our software, have a good day.
Yeah, and so you keep saying these are stupid analogies, but they're not. They're great analogies. And I love, the Jim Collins that the get the right people on the bus and then get them in the right seat. That if for anyone that's ever read Good to Great, I mean, that's probably one of the best business books that's ever been written. And they followed that up with Good to Great for public sectors. And actually, I had a previous guest on the podcast, Mike Irwin. He wrote a book called Lead Yourself First, and he's got a couple of books out since then. But he was an Army veteran and the founder of Team Red, White, and Blue. Just an amazing person. What I didn't know before I had him on the show was that he's the son of 2 police officers from Syracuse, New York. But we got into a pretty similar conversation, and I don't know if I told him this story or not, but it's funny you should bring this up because after I read that book, I read it when it first came out, and I was just at the time I was a young supervisor, and I was also a team leader on our SWAT team, and I was on the board for our state SWAT Officers Association. And so at our annual conference, I taught a class really based around the Good to Great concept about when you're building a SWAT team, when you're building your team, how do you bring in the right people? Because you're all cops, you're all police officers, but yet there are still specific tasks and roles that we require a certain skill set to be able to do. And all of it, just like being a cop, all of it also, really kind of centers on performance. So how do we get high performers into a high performing team and then maximize their performance? And so, so what you're saying really resonates with me. And then, even going back to the CrossFit analogy, when you're taught something in the right way, right there, or in an interesting way, I think there's always going to be this opportunity for that skill to transfer and that knowledge to transfer. And the more you know, right, the more you know. It's like the old commercial. And you can start, and as long as you're open to it, you can connect dots. And the reason I bring the story up is because I see this a lot, and I'm sure it's not just in policing, right? But people get pretty specific about what their role and what their job is, and what, like, I'm, quote, just a patrolman, or I'm just a detective. And, I always tried to fight that mindset because everybody is contributing to the organization. And I'm at the end of that class, I had, when I was getting the feedback forms, I had somebody write, basically, gave me like a 1 star. Most of the, it's like you always focus on the negative. Most of the reviews were overwhelmingly positive and good, but I had a couple that were negative, and one of them basically said, "This is dumb. This is not SWAT training. This doesn't apply. The business principles don't apply to what we're doing in police work." And, that always, that stuck with me for a long time because, for me, I was like, okay, I missed an opportunity for at least one person in this class to kind of expand their horizons a little bit. And maybe you can't reach everybody, but this kind of goes me back, brings me back now to what you're doing. And that's that concept of the ripple, right? And if you can drop a piece of information or a new technology that's going to expand somebody's ability to learn something new or appreciate something else that will bring them to a higher level of awareness and understanding and make them better at what they're doing. I think there's always a benefit there if you're willing and ready to accept it.
Yeah, I think the younger generations, and I don't want to age myself because obviously I'm very young, but I think they're more open towards getting different items into their training material. And I call training not just items that we go, to a seminar that we receive from our employer, or even, a book that we read, but everything we do is some level of training, right? I mean, even if I walk to the mailbox now, it's some kind of physical exercise and training, to me at least. And what I find, when I was growing up, you went to work, you did your job, you left after work, and then you had your social life, and that's where you have the fun. And I mentioned my first dissertation. I mentioned about that you spend, if you're really lucky, you sleep 8 hours, and if you're really really lucky, you may work 8-9 hours, and you have leisure time for the rest. But let's take that sleeping time away. That means that half of the life when you're awake, you're at work. Why not make it fun? Like, why not have fun and love what you do? I tell my kids, and I'm going to be careful how loud I say this, like, they don't have to go to college. Pick a job that you like and do that and have fun. And I mean by fun, it's not like you just sit there and play video games, unless you get paid for that. That is your job. I mean, I guess so be it, right? But they don't have to go to college. They don't have to study to be a doctor, a lawyer, an engineer, a scientist, whatever, right? They don't, right? I'd rather them be in their element and love what they do and do that for the next 30, 40, 50 years. I know there's this stupid saying, if you love what you do, you never work a day in your life.
That's
that
true.
Is me. I have not worked. I love what we do and I believe in it. But why do I love it? Because we incorporate our entire life. I mentioned earlier, I don't do the whole work-life balance stuff, because what I do is not as stressful as a police officer, right? For them, it's really probably hard to incorporate in one life, for example. But in my life, it works, and I can work when I want and how I want, and I love what I do, right? I really, really love that. You mentioned earlier, police officers, their motivation. At first, when I started working with in law enforcement, I thought, well, they have a fancy badge and a gun, and the badge opens every door. And I learned very quickly that's not why people want to become police officers at all.
Well, we try to weed those people out, but sometimes they get through.
Well, but I thought it'd be cool to have a badge, right? Because it's like, hey, if I get the movies, right? Stupid stuff you see in movies. But the life of police, the fact that the majority of the police officers, they really want to serve. And it's not just lip service. They really, really want to serve their community. That's amazing to me, right? And so I mentioned earlier the appreciation that in Germany, right? And I left Germany in 97, right? But the appreciation in Germany that you have for police officers and educators is much higher. And I wish it was like this in the US. The appreciation we should have for those professions should be much, much higher. Much, much, much higher. And I'm not talking about pay them more money, because that's temporary. Money is not a motivation. People adjust to it, and it's a different philosophical discussion. But they say, well, I need to make money to get by, and yeah, money is definitely one of what we call a hygiene factor, but it's not a motivator, right? And so all of those things to have the appreciation for us that can sleep at night because somebody else is out there 24/7 ensuring we can sleep at night peacefully. I think it goes a long way. And I learned to have a different appreciation for it. And that's why we really put a lot of resources and money, right? I mean, it costs money to operate a company into serving that community, the community of law enforcement. I mentioned earlier that, Dr. Javidi developed those 11 rings, right? And those 11 rings are not just touching resiliency training, but it's, just on a high level, emotional, mental, spiritual, social, of course, the occupational, but the financial side, the leadership side, the physical side, the family, right? When you're a police officer, I hear it a lot from spouses, and you're married to a police officer. It's not like they go home and then life doesn't catch up with them, but relationships, all of those items are so important, not just in our normal life, but in everything we do, right? Because they have that spillover effect that touches more than just me, the employee. And so when I talked earlier about this marriage of what makes up Magnusworx, of us as a software company that really understands actions and triggers and actionizable items, in Dr. Javidi's group, National Command and Staff College, that is that marriage where we really want to go out and serve. Now, I say all of that, and it sounds great in philosophy, but it takes a leader to do that, right? At the end, we are just a software, right? And
Yes.
if you have a command staff or a chief or if you don't have a leader, it's irrelevant. You can have the greatest phone, and I'm not mentioning a phone now, but you all know the phones that are out there. They can be very powerful, and you can do a lot more than talking on the phone and texting. But if you don't know how to use it, it's also irrelevant, right? I mean,
Or if
I tell,
you choose not to use it
or if
and
you choose
ignore the
not to use
capabilities,
it,
yeah.
right? So police officers or law enforcement, they're skeptical in nature, as they should be, because the stuff that happens to them. But it takes also a leader, not just a manager, to say, hey, I'm gonna trust this. I want to really try this out, and I want to then see if it makes a difference. I always tell them, hey, I put my money where my mouth is. If this is not for you, if it doesn't measure the impact you want to measure, whether it's money, satisfaction, decrease in it, whatever the impact may be, terminate the agreement. We're never going to hold you to something that doesn't create impact in you, right? But it still takes that taking that step for the leader to say, hey, I'm going to do that. I'm going to trust that. I believe it makes a difference. And that sometimes is interesting. Of
Yeah.
course, I'm very passionate about it. And I would think that everybody would subscribe to this because why wouldn't they? Like we measure results, right? And
Well,
so,
you would
but
think,
then you
right?
run
Or
into
you would hope.
people.
That's funny you should bring that up too, because there's another, just on another sidebar. In the last decade, there's been this big push towards data-driven policing, intelligence-led policing, and it's really about, which I'm a firm believer of, and it's really about how do you make decisions based on how and where and when to deploy your resources based on results. A lot of times, the way allocation of resources works in public safety is people are looking at two primary measurements, and one is response time. How long does it take to get to an officer to a priority call, like an emergency call, versus how do we distribute the workload equally amongst the workforce, so you're not overworking part of your workforce while part of your workforce is underutilized. And I was really surprised, like when I ask a lot of law enforcement leaders that question, how they're measuring that, they don't have an answer, and that tells me that they're not. I know a lot of people are, but there's still a big area. So that my question now is, with what you guys are doing, because you've mentioned it a few times, like, we can show you that this works, and we can show you tangible results in the return that you're getting, and we have the data. So what can you give me an example, or maybe a few examples of uh, what you mean by that, what kind of data you're capturing, and how you could show an agency like ROI for your product?
I may sound like an HR guy now, right? But it will make also sense in the law enforcement world. Well, first of all, we do actually have mechanisms in place. They're more tactical, like where we have dashboards that look at allocation of resources, right? Because yes, the person, but then also resources, and that command staff on one level, but then maybe what we call the middle managers, can have different dashboards where they see exactly where the stressors are, where the non-stressors are. One precinct maybe getting a lot more action than another, so therefore you want to change your shift schedule and we can do all of that, or we do all of that in our system actually, where it's a fairly easy tool to use, right? You log in, you have your dashboards, and you see everything that's going on. That's one part, of course. What I always say by measurable results, because it's very easy to sell a philosophy, but then what, right? At some point, we don't become mission critical. Well, for me, it's very important that we're not just a nice to have, but a must have, and we are mission critical, right? And so there's return of investment. And again, this is where it becomes probably academic or too HR driven, but it will still make sense. We measure in quantifiable data, like those return of investments, right? And there's 4 different buckets that I normally go into. It's the decrease in attrition, right? When we start an engagement, we always do what we call a zero measurement, right? Just to status quo. The pulse
Yeah.
the organization, this is where we are, this is your attrition rates today, this is the employee net promoter score, employee satisfaction, and. And then when we start working with teams, of course, we keep on measuring, because that's what you do, right? You do something, and then hypothesis testing, and then you measure, and so forth. And then we can see how that changes over time. And so there's this decrease in attrition, right? Less people leaving because of us, making sure we stop that bleeding. because again, it's very expensive to replace a law enforcement agent, officer, and so forth. Then we look at employee satisfaction itself, that net promoter score that I mentioned, that can be measured, and it's actually measured in our system. We can push that through. Then engagement levels, how much time do they spend in the system, the content at work, how do they feel about it? There's a lot of science behind that, of course, and how we look at engagement. And then productivity level, right? Of course, with some of the desk-based workers, in manufacturing, it's very easy to measure productivity, right? Because you have 50 pieces in an hour versus 60 pieces an hour. Now you have an increase in productivity. Right. In those trivial terms, it doesn't quite work that way when you have more qualitative stuff, right? When a police officer responds to a call, or how many calls they respond to, and what nature. And so there's what we call our secret sauce. There's a taxonomy on the back end. There's a sentiment analysis on the back end that runs automatically, and that shows in those measurable results. And then, of course, we have continuous check-ins, right? We sit down, and again, it requires a leader that it says, give me 30 minutes at least once every 2 months to sit down. Because what's important is when we talk about deploying our software, we get that status quo, we measure, we analyze, we visualize it, but then we actionize it. So something has to happen. Right. And so a lot of times it's up to the leader to say, oh, I see that there's a need in this precinct. And sometimes it's very low-hanging fruits and things can change. And sometimes things cannot change, but for that leader at least to address it, right? I always tell people, if you ask people how they're doing and they tell you that they're tired 10 times and you don't do anything, don't ask them. You're demoralizing. Because at some point I will not tell you how I'm doing if you don't do anything against it or about it anyways. Right. Even if there's nothing you can do about it, but just acknowledging my concern that you heard me. And what we found, we have an open text response in our software, right? I mean, it's an app. They can reply in an email. I mean, we meet them where they are, but giving them that open text response. And it's not supposed to be a complaint fest, but rather you give them the opportunity to write something. And then we do the sentiment analysis or the natural language processing on the back end of all of that, where you don't have to read it all, but just giving them the opportunity to say something. And then deciphering what that means and acknowledging that, it goes a long way, especially at the beginning. And then when I said, like, when you actionize it and you have those actions and triggers and you give them content and you develop it and you invest in employees that are happy don't leave. Money is not one of those things. And there's a lot of studies, like I said. But if you're happy in your role, you like your environment and you're in sync and you feel like they are investing in you by providing them with training and resources and stuff, then you're not even going to look for another job, right? Now, there's some people, of course, they just care about money, and if they get more, okay, let them go. That's fine. Those are not the ones you want to keep, on the bus anyways. But it's really understanding of what's in sync, and that's where we help with correlating all of the different data sets to provide for that holistic viewpoint.
Yeah, I love it. There's, I worked with a data analytics company for a product that we used, and it was really about, again, using data to be able to kind of understand what's bubbling just below the surface. You capture so much information, so many data points on crime, about different things that are happening. It's just almost impossible for one person to ever really capture all of it. But this is where machine learning and algorithms can be some of our best supporters, by raising our level of attention to things that are bubbling just below the surface, and then they pop up, and now you have a human look at it, acknowledge it, and then either do something about it or move on, right? You make a decision, but at least brings it to your attention. And that, I think maybe this is an analogy, maybe I'm incorrect, but that's kind of where I see, like when you're talking about the sentiment analysis, like there could be something from a morale perspective, or it could be a policy decision, whether it's on the police side or the municipal side, or something that's impacting the way people feel or about work, about what's going on. And if you're not aware of it, you can't do anything about it. But if you start to see some of these things repeat themselves, that gives you an opportunity to intervene. And hopefully
it's important to not,
right.
Sorry, I mean, but it's important.
No, that's it.
A lot of times we did that in school, right? We learned things we already knew. Why? Like, you already know that. So it's not that you always have to do everything. The moment in time where you have that need, our system learns, okay, now we should push content to you that deals with like that resiliency, right? Because you've had a lot of stress. There's a lot of stressors, a lot of 911 calls, for example, that are high level and so forth. And so therefore, I don't send you now a message on like financial peace. I think that very moment you don't care about the finances. You probably care more about like just staying awake or whatever it may be, right? And so it's important to meet the people where they are in the journey. And that journey, it doesn't end. It doesn't end for me. It doesn't end for you. It doesn't end for anybody, because we're constantly in different environments, different situations where we have different needs. And that's what makes it so important to subscribe to that lifelong learning. And it's not just about our software, but it's about individuals in general, right? I mean, there's lots of studies that the second you retire and do nothing, you get sick, right? Because it's your immune system shutting down and trying to recover and recuperate. And so I'm not saying you have to work until the rest of your life, but have some purpose that's defined for you, whatever that looks like, and work towards it, and constantly try to learn new things, right? Travel, learn a different skill, whatever it takes to set yourself up from a different environment perspective.
Yeah, that's a great topic too. Just so many things right there. As a fairly recent retiree, one of my goals, I've been health and wellness focused for a long time. And again, just going back to what we were talking about in the beginning, like I saw what was happening. I saw the mortality rates and the early mortality rates for police officers, 18 to 22 years below the national average. Cardiovascular disease rates at 18 times greater than the general population. There are reasons that these things are happening. Under the old model, and I was just teaching a class for new chiefs in Indiana, and under the old model, 15 years ago, even 10 years ago, it was, if you break an officer, so what? There's another one waiting to fill that spot. And that I'm not saying that's right, because it's not, but that was the way police departments around the country operated, and that's the way municipalities operated, because they could, and they weren't forced to really start to understand, well, why is this profession killing officers at a much earlier time than other professions? Why do police officers have higher rates of heart attacks and cancer and dementia than other professions?
And suicide.
And suicide, that was getting to that. In what we now know, and again, I think one of the best findings, or I guess, the sixth pillar in that 21st century policing initiative that was a result of the Obama administration's deep dive into law enforcement, because they hadn't done it in like 30 years, officer safety and wellness. And there was a big emphasis on the mental wellness that as a result of that document in that sixth pillar. But there was a bit of a disconnect from the physical wellness side and the understanding that it all works together. And then you've mentioned a few times financial wellness. So ultimately, I think where we're all finally coming to the understanding is there has to be an investment in your police departments, not an optional. It's a mandatory thing. It has to happen, where you're investing in a holistic approach to wellness. That means the mental side, the physical side, the emotional side, the financial side, the spiritual side, all of these things. And if we do that, we will retain officers at a higher rate. We will then, I think, solve one of our biggest internal problems, is that nobody inside of policing is advocating for others to come join the profession right now. It's our biggest problem. It's the number one reason why we can't recruit, is because those that are doing the job are saying to their own children and their own loved ones, don't do this job. Please go do anything else. Go do anything else but this. So, we're scaring people away. And, there are some very legitimate reasons why people should enter into this profession with some caution. But I do think, thankfully, the pendulum is kind of swinging back, and people they do recognize that disinvestment, defunding is not the answer. Here is, and I want to, really just a shout out to you and others that are getting into this space now, that are bringing this knowledge and this expertise to say, hey, look, there is a problem here, but there are solutions as well. And there are people out here that support law enforcement and that are wanting to put their money where their mouth is and provide products and a solution, not just talk about it, not just complain about it, not just, you know, throw out a few, buzzwords here and there, but actually do something about it. So I really do, I'm fascinated with your work. I think what you're doing is amazing. And thank
I
you.
have to say, one more thing at the end. What I learned though, and I think where we have to give credit to the police force. We have some clients that are absolutely incredible, like really incredible to work with. And they took that money and resources and set up wellness teams internally. And I think that's where industry can learn from. Like, with some of our clients, they allocated officers that drive some of those, they call them the wellness teams.
Yep.
And they can really focus on that. And it's an incredible impact. It makes my life or our life so much easier when they're serious about it. And I honestly think that if industry and some of those jobs, right, especially like the skilled labor, the manufacturing, if they had those wellness teams, I think they could really benefit from it as well. And it would be an incredible return of investment, even if you have to look at your money, right? Because of course, the for-profit companies, they have to please their shareholders or whoever else they have to please, right? And so
Yep.
that may be a little bit different, but it's an investment into the future, right? And it's an investment that makes sense. To hear that police officers die earlier, that the suicide rate, at the end of the day, they are human beings, right? And so that's what I hope that people realize, that hey, this is, I never understood the whole defunding the police part, but that's my personal opinion. And so when I look at any human being, I think life is worth living, and so that's where I'm the people guy, and I think that the investment
Amen.
into people will always pay off. And I've been called naive before, and I've been called, yeah, they take advantage of you. So be it. As long as I can look in the mirror into my children's face at night when I come home, I'd rather people take advantage of me, but I know I do something good and impact other people's lives where I can make a difference. And I think that's where we can go far.
My friend, Dr. Jim Greenwald, aka Greenie, we have a program that we do where it's called the Blood Doesn't Lie. We use this a comprehensive NMR blood test to give officers their 10-year cardiometabolic risk assessment. But he has a saying that the police can lead the nation out of the metabolic disorder that we're in. And he firmly believes that. And he's another person like you that just passionate about helping cops. And, that's, and again, another reason why these wellness initiatives are so important, because it's not, and again, for police leaders, this isn't just about, making people feel better. This is about performance. This is about, creating an environment that's going to optimize your police force. So when they go out to serve their community, they're the best that they can be. And we can invest in this continual improvement. And that cycle then starts to repeat itself. And so rather than getting into a doom loop where we're spiraling down, we're actually creating an accelerator where our performance is getting better, our technology gets better, our people get better. And as our people get better and the technology gets better, they improve each other. And that's where I see the future going. And anyway, we better take a pause now, and we'll have to start thinking about episode 2. But before I do that, maybe some closing thoughts, and then if people are interested in what you guys are doing at Magnusworx, what's the best way for them to get in touch with you and reach out?
Well, you can always, add me on LinkedIn and send me a message. I think my OCD makes me very responsive to anybody, but also, just going on the Magnusworx website, looking through it, reading some testimony, and if it clicks, right, we may not be for everybody, but if it clicks, reach out to us. There's a lot of ways to contact us, whether that's by phone, by email, by in message, and so forth. We definitely talk to everybody, and I would love to learn from one another. And there's always 1 + 1 = 3, right? Maybe my math teacher would disagree, but I think in life I subscribe to that philosophy. And so we love to partner with police forces, law enforcement agencies that believe in their people and want to invest in them.
Awesome. And Magnusworx, it's Magnusworx for
X,
those
yeah.
that are listening. All right. Dr. Timo Sandritter, I appreciate your time. I appreciate you spending some of your valuable time with us. I have about a million more questions, but I'm going to shut up because otherwise it'll be another 3 hours.
Well, thank you. Thanks for having me. This was great.
Oh, I really appreciate it. Until next time, everybody, we'll be 1042.